Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. My name is Svejnar. I am Director of the Center on Global Economic Governance, and I'm very pleased, together with John Micgiel, who is Director of the East Central European Center here at Columbia, to welcome you to today's discussion of the European crisis from a political perspective. We're very pleased to have with us two renowned speakers who will introduce the topic and then open it up for discussion. So the discussion will be the main part of the entire event. Let me start by briefly introducing the speakers. You know about them. Karel Schwarzenberg, who is the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, has a long history. It goes back, for those of you who are interested in political things, to the 1980s, when he was chairman of the International Helsinki Committee for Human Rights, an organization that was very influential in bringing freedom to the countries of the former Soviet bloc. He, in 1990, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, he became Chancellor to the President Václav Havel of the Czech Republic. He led a number of delegations to hotspots all over the former Soviet bloc, the transition economies. He entered politics on a grand scale in 2007 when he was named the Foreign Minister of the Czech Republic. He was nominated by the Green Party at that point and served in the coalition. In 2009, he started, together with Miroslav Kalousek, a new party, Top 09, and was elected the chairman of the party and serves as chairman to this day. He is, as I said, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs since 13th of July 2010. Equally impressive, we have Urmas Paet, who is Minister of Foreign Affairs for the last 7 years, actually, since April 2005 in Estonia. He also served as Minister of Culture before that, so he's a very broad experience. He, in the city of Tallinn, he was also the elder in the district of Nõmme there. So both of the speakers are well-versed, obviously, following the events in Europe. It's very appropriate to have perspective of the, quote, new states. I would also like to welcome representatives of embassies of other European countries that came and joined us for the discussion here. And so without much ado, I will let maybe Karel Schwarzenberg to start with a few remarks, followed by Urmas Paet, and then John Micgiel will moderate and use the usual crowd control for purposes that we need here. Okay, thank you very much.
United States of Europe, it is a dream which started in the 20s of the 20th century, when actually a man born in my country, Count Kuno-Kalergi, founded the pan-European movement. But of course, he instigated this idea, but the very form of what is now the European Union was more influenced by Jean Monnet, who during the war was sitting in Washington and preparing post-war Europe, and who was convinced that the only way to prevent the war in Europe again would be if the industries of Germany and France would be intertwined, which was basically absolutely correct. And of course, Jean Monnet, being in Washington, was to a high degree influenced by the existence of the United States of America. And so this vision of him of one day a union of European states then was getting a form. Nevertheless, in effect came his theme in the beginning of the 50s, in the midst of the 50s, when with the treaties of Rome, first the Mountain Union and then the European Community started, which was then changed 20 years ago into the European Union. It was from the beginning on a political project, which sometimes people forget today, because it was actually an enormous economic success for all European states. And so some people are saying it was an economic project. No, it was from the beginning a political project to prevent war in Europe, and to establish harmony and peace between the European nations, who for more than 1,000 years successfully tried to kill each other in different wars. And nowadays, when you listen to some European voices around the crisis, around the euro, you have sometimes the impression the whole project was an economic one. It became to a certain degree, but it wasn't from the beginning. Now, due to this crisis, of course, there are now voices rising, understandably, who call for real union. And Barroso, the president of the Commission, the German Minister of Foreign Westerwelle, who assembled a team of different ministers of foreign affairs around him, they both suggested a much closer union of Europe, which would be really nearly something like United States of Europe. Of course, the great difference is that the United States started with 13 colonies, which had the same language, the same mostly religion, and to a great part inhabitants of the same origin. Whereas in Europe, we have states, and most of them are 28, and there are even more. We have more than 30 European states, and all of them have a 1,000-year-old history. Most European states developed between 1800 and 1200. So they're really the old states who developed their own, not only the language they had, but different in the credo, Catholic, Protestant, or Orthodox, in the way of their own culture, and so on. So the differences are much bigger than the United States, where after the 13 colonies, the country was divided with a pencil and a piece of paper, and you see it still today on the map of the United States, that these square states, which of course, if you compare it with the puzzle-like configuration of Europe, is a totally different system. And the second and one great difference is whereas people who immigrated to America during the centuries felt themselves very soon as Americans. And first the colonists, after the Boston Tea Party, but then all the immigrants who came from all corners of the world and of most of the European states, they felt very soon as Americans. Staying at home in Europe, in their original states, they of course still feel today as Spanish, French, German, Swedes, Czechs, whatever you wish, but not really as Europeans. As they are citizens of Europe is a more formal thing. And that, of course, causes a problem that really densely woven union can only exist if there is a European demos, a nation of Europe. And that will need some time. Maybe in 2 or 3 generations, young people will feel more like Europeans than what the language nation is, Portuguese or Norwegian or Italian. But I am afraid this development will take still some time. So we have to take that in account. But it's a necessity, as was demonstrated by the said statesmen and Barroso and the German foreign minister, leads us to a closer union. I do think we have to realize one thing. The European Union is not a normal state, as the United States are, the United Kingdom or something. It is an ongoing process. To understand the European Union, you have to know it's an ongoing process which started in the 50s and still isn't finished. Always after 10 years or something, a new thing came, the Maastricht Treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, and so on, which changed the condition, brought the different countries closer together. And maybe now that the tempo of getting closer and more united and more common institution will be faster than in the past. But one shouldn't expect too much. The race is big, and as soon as the economic crisis ends, I have the strong impression good old national prejudices, ideas of the sovereignty of the state will be again the dominant ideas. So I do think we are getting closer to the United States of Europe, but it will be an asymptotic process and never reach the state of union as the United States of America. Maybe we will get more institutions, we will get closer, but as long as we don't have, as I told you, a European nation, European demos who feels European, it will be for each change, for each step towards a greater integration, it will be a long fight. So I have spoken too long for the beginning. Please, Urmas, it's up to you.
Thank you, thank you.
Well, good afternoon also from my side, and I basically can agree what just Karel Schwarzenberg told. But in Europe, in the European Union, all our societies, we have seen during the last 2-3 years permanent flow of negative news. And the source of this permanent flow of negative news is this, well, famous financial or debt crisis. And the problem is that because majority of messages of news which people get from press and public sources, they are negative. They have something to do with the European Union, although it is only from the one and quite, of course it's important, but still only one sphere of EU's activities.
All right.
So well.
Technology at work.
I'm not sure. Okay. And at this stage, the biggest concern and biggest risk for me is that if there are more and more people inside Europe, in different European societies, which start to be more and more skeptical, and they enlarge actually this negativism or negative views of fiscal and debt issues actually to other spheres of Europe's everyday life. We have seen already during the last couple of years the results of different parliamentary elections of different European countries where extremes from both sides, right and left, parties which are anti-European, anti-difference, anti, everything, they getting more and more support. Even in well, our neighborhood in northern part of Europe, where usually, for example, in Finland or in Sweden, the political scene or political arena has been quite stable and traditional. But as outcome of last parliamentary elections also in these countries, we saw quite rapid increase of support to parties which are really skeptical on European cooperation and also on future of this cooperation. So that at this stage, the biggest risk actually is how to avoid the development of different negative feelings, negative moods to much more important spheres of EU's everyday life than it is, well, debt or financial crisis. It's also clear that during last decades of Europe's history, we have achieved lots of very positive things like common market, like freedom of movement of people, Schengen area, and so on and so on. So that it is at this very moment actually quite, well, not wise to see Europe or European Union only as some sort of combination different fiscal issues or problems. So that, well, inside Europe we face more and more pessimism, but at the same time there are still, I guess, around 11 countries which like to join Europe with European Union immediately. Well, it also says clearly that from outside the things are still looking good and much better than maybe in the eyes of some skeptics inside the EU. I should say that I am not among these skeptics. I still like to keep this larger picture, and we really have to value all this positive what European cooperation and the EU achieved during its history, and there is still lots to do. Now the debate about the issue of more Europe and more integration. Basically, I guess that for every smaller or middle-sized European country, it is practically actually very useful to get more Europe, to get more European cooperation. For example, in our case, Estonia has 1.3 million people, European Union has 500 million people. But the fact is that after our joining with the EU 2004, well, we directly feel that the power and the size of the European Union, well, is also coming over to us, so that in international arena, other countries are looking at us not as European country with 1.3 million people, but as member state of the European Union, which also has its role in well, developing different policies in the EU, and so on and so on. When we look at security issues, defense issues, also economic possibilities, 500 million as common market, it's, well, very serious opportunity and challenge. So that clearly, theoretically, we and I guess many other smaller European countries are supporters of more Europe. But we also have to face reality. I guess one of the problems in Europe at the moment is that some part of political elite moved too fast. I'm not sure how many people in Europe actually still understand what this Lisbon Treaty was and is about. It was quite quickly done. I remember also in Estonia we almost didn't have any debate in our society on this. People, well, they were not interested in, press was not interested in, parliament accepted, no real discussion even there, and everything happened. And all this happened when there were economically, in this sense, relatively good times. It was permanent feeling of growth, which never ends. There were already a couple of generations of people who more or less saw only economic growth every year again, +2, +3, +5%, good times even more. And when the recession came or the crisis came, it was actually quite a shock, because I guess quite big parts of different societies, they thought that it can never happen. But it happened. And of course, it also puts all other elements also of European cooperation into completely different perspective. So that I guess that at this very time, it's also important to do in Europe what we can to do already in existing legal framework. For example, there are still things we can do what concerns better and stronger common market, like digital common market, which still is in very early phase of development. There are lots of things we still can do much better in our common foreign and security policy. And there are many other areas where we actually didn't use so far already existing possibilities and opportunities. I'm actually personally quite skeptical about this all very revolutionary ideas to move very fast forward what concerns giving more authority to Brussels or to the European Commission. And simple reason is that this very time is not the best for this. People are not, in this sense, optimistic enough, I guess, that we have to, well, face the reality and deal with present situation, and to avoid what I started with, to avoid that this feeling of crisis will develop into other spheres of Europe. And if here somebody, well, will start to say that now we have moved forward even faster than so far, then I guess that this gap between some European political leadership and societies will be even bigger. And we will face during next different elections in different countries that the outcome, the political outcome of these elections is even worse for so-called united and stronger Europe. Because, as I said, we already see the trend where anti-European forces, different anti-anti forces getting just more and more support. And then it, of course, already will then change the reality in the direction I personally don't want to see. Well, I stop here my monologue so that I prefer to continue with dialogue if you're
very good. Well, thank you very much. I'll turn it over to John.
Okay, maybe I can start with a few questions of my own. Both of your countries have weathered the crisis, the economic crisis, the recession, fairly well. Both countries are considered to be consolidated democracies, and that's not because I say so, that's because watchdog organizations like Freedom House say so. So they look at a variety of indicators to rank countries in this part of the world and elsewhere, and both Estonia and the Czech Republic have basically not shown no indication of a decline in democratic consolidation. That's quite an accomplishment because other countries in the old Europe are not showing those indicators. So you're doing relatively well. And it seems when you look from the outside in the European Union that not everybody is on the same page. And so your countries are very active in reaching out to potential European partners eastward. So the Czech Republic and the Foreign Ministry and the Foreign Minister in particular is very active in Belarus, where elections just took place that nobody is particularly happy with except for one person, and also in Ukraine. Estonia has the Estonian Eastern Partnership Center and is giving know-how and experience to people from administrations in the 6 Eastern Partnership countries. And my question to both of you, very briefly, is how do you mobilize a large, disparate European Union that has different views of where it should be putting its energy? So wouldn't be a surprise to know that France is more interested in the Mediterranean than it is in Eastern Europe. By the same token, the problems that the European Union faces there, and which the countries that are further to the east could benefit from, are huge. And so how do you mobilize the strength of the European Union and focus it?
Well, I would doubt that we can mobilize something. We are with great difficulties moving to that aim. We founded the Eastern Neighborship Program, and of course it is just simple daily hard work to convince the people in Brussels, to convince our colleagues from genuinely Western Europe the importance of Eastern Europe. And so I don't think it's a great mobilization. It's daily hard work. And of course, we have different views. That's quite natural. And one thing I would like to mention, if we look now at the fully integrated United States of America, one shouldn't forget that there were 2 important steps. The constitutional changes done. First, when the Brits when they conquered Washington, the British-American War, and then they needed a civil war, which was really very cruel, and it changed the institutions of the United States and created a unified United States. I hope that Europe don't need these experiences, but that to get a more intensive union, more unified union, I'm afraid, as people are who they are, they always need a crisis. To move, you never move voluntarily. If you are glad with the state you have, you move only if it is necessary. And so, I mean, so far I hope we won't need a civil war, nor again occupation of Europe to be united, but that the crises are necessary to get a more unified Europe. That I'm quite sure of. Therefore, maybe this economic crisis is even a kind of hidden blessing.
Well, all developments around Europe and in our immediate neighborhood, of course, it also is direct concern of our common foreign and security policy. And I guess that there are more and more politicians, but also representatives of other groups who understand that we should not expect that the European Union's common foreign and security policy will be successful in faraway places if we are not successful in our immediate neighborhood. And it means both. It means our southern neighborhood and also eastern one. Yeah, I agree that it is quite natural that for southern European countries, of course, for them, developments in North Africa and Middle East are maybe more important than what's going on in eastern part of Europe. But during last years of developing both these neighborhood policies, but also common foreign and security policy, I guess that it is today much more interlinked and also mixed than it was maybe some years ago. So that today, I guess it's in this sense we are already on next level. We don't have to explain to our good friends from Western or Southern Europe why it's important to engage Ukraine or try to change situation in Belarus or support Moldova and Georgia, and also vice versa. So I think that it has been a natural process of development where more and more people understood that there is clear interlinkage, that absence of democracy or stability in our neighborhood, be it south or east, it influences in final end every and each EU member state, because inside the EU we are so strongly interdependent and interlinked, so that you can't say anymore that, for example, the events in Libya will influence Spain and Italy, but we in Estonia, we just, well, don't care because we don't feel this influence. No, it's not true. Because of this high level and sequence of cooperation inside the EU, then all these elements are also, well, in northern part of Europe, and also vice versa. All this possible destabilization or not so nice processes in our eastern neighborhood, well, also countries which are not immediate neighbors, they also feel it, be it from a bad side like illegal immigration issues, or also some problems with smooth trade and economy, and more also these general principles what concerns human rights, and the same, how successful EU's foreign and security policy is in its immediate neighborhood.
Let's open it up to questions. Please identify yourself.
And maybe if you can come and use the microphone, that would be actually excellent. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm a professor at Columbia University. I'm former permanent representative of Ukraine to the UN. And definitely my question concerns Ukraine. So we were almost there with the association agreement. before the famous or infamous events with Yulia Tymoshenko and other opponents of the current government. The association agreement was initialed in March, in spite of all the difficulties. So, how do you assess the situation vis-à-vis Ukraine, the prospects of signing the association agreement, and another, how do you assess the situation if, after all, or after the parliamentary election, Yulia Tymoshenko and others are freed? Would that be enough for signing the association agreement? And then the third, in general, how do you assess the prospects of Ukraine currently to get closer to Europe? Thank you.
I admit that Ukraine, which was really one of the main aims of our policy to get closer to Europe, as a development it became a good one. On one side, must admit, Ukraine's team in the last years, when they were in Brussels, did a very good work. And the agreements prepared would be really thoroughly better the situation in Ukraine and will be accepted. The unhappy thing is that in Ukraine, three things come together. Let's be honest. One is that irrelevant which administration or political parties in power were, there was enormous corruption, and especially in the key area of oil and gas business. Now, as you know, oil and gas is imported from Russia. So the combination of high corruption and that the main supplier is the great neighbor created an unquiet situation, because evidently leading politicians in Ukraine were much influenced by that thing. The whole thing again Yulia Tymoshenko is, the present administration says she made an arrangement, a treaty with Russia, highly unfavorable for Ukraine. Ukraine gets too expensive oil and gas and so on. It's a very difficult business, and we see that at one side there is one problem, and the other is that evidently the present president has decided by hook or by crook stay in power. So what happens in preparation of these elections, including putting opposition leader into jail, is aiming for only one thing, to keep him in power. And he strangely accepted, even at the meeting in Crimea, a treatment by the Russian president, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, which was against the most primitive rules of diplomacy, of behaving towards the head of a sovereign state. Putin behaved to the Ukraine president by far worse than any colonial officer would have treated a tribe leader in Africa. And that all makes the situation much worse. Not yet as far as in Russia. We have to say that in Russia, the liberty was constrained and democracy very much more constrained than it is in Ukraine. We have still a relative free press in Ukraine and so on and so on. But of course, more and more, the Russian model of ruling the country evidently impresses the President and the administration in Kiev. So that is a difficult situation. We will see how the elections will be. For the moment, we are afraid that the election will be very problematic, and I'm not so sure that after elections, be it Yulia Tymoshenko or others who were put into jail, they will let her out. Of course, the primary cause was that she can't take part in the election because she has a certain charisma. But another thing is, I think the present administration don't like any idea of opposition.
Students, please, this is your opportunity to grill a foreign minister. It's lunchtime.
Yeah, there is back there.
Hi. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Micgiel, and I'm a visiting researcher at the Saltzman Institute for War and Peace at the Columbia University. Some 2 weeks ago, a group of European foreign ministers proposed a more robust role for Europe in the world affairs, where they proposed more institutionalization of foreign affairs and more cooperation and creation of sort of European foreign ministry. And this has been I've been following German and Dutch news, and they were very enthusiastic about it, but I didn't hear anything about it in Czech, Polish, or Slovak news beyond the one-liner statements. Well, maybe 2 lines. But there hasn't been more analysis given to that. And I would like to see how the new member states and smaller countries see this sort of initiative. Thank you.
Well, maybe one thing. The Poles expressed themselves very clearly. I would advise you look up at the 2 great speeches of Foreign Minister Sikorski, one in Berlin he had about half a year ago, and one he had now in Oxford University, which shows him he's definitely pro a greater, stronger European Union. In my country, the situation is a bit difficult because whereas in Poland, the President, the Prime Minister, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs belong to the same group, so there's one voice of Poland heard. In the Czech Republic,
Isn't it the same case in Czech Republic?
Well, we have a bit of different situation, and therefore the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Czech Republic has a distinctly different view of Europe than the President. And that makes great public statements a bit difficult.
You would need 2 analyses.
Okay. But so you, as a foreign minister, do you see this as likely to happen? That there is going to be more?
I hope that from the beginning I was clear enough that I do see as an aim for which we will work and fight, but it will need many years till something what was designed by Westerwelle or by Barroso becomes reality. Okay. It's a long mile to Tipperary.
Well, I agree with Karel Schwarzenberg, as I said in my starting monologue, that I personally, of course, as representative of also smaller countries, like to see that there will be more Europe and also joint new and stronger institutions, including what concerns foreign policy, will be good and important. But from a realistic point of view, I completely agree with Karel that even if it starts to move into this direction, it will take a long time. If you look at the present situation of our foreign and security policy of the European Union, then also, well, now we have External Action Service, which is joint. We declared it clearly already many years ago that the ultimate goal is to have common foreign and security policy. Well, things are step by step improving, but still, when it goes, for example, just one example, Palestine issue. then EU is not split into two, but even into three. And not only in theoretical opinions, but also what concerns actions, for example, vote in UNESCO when Palestine put its application, and now the discussions what we're going to do if the same happens here in United Nations General Assembly, so on. So that, as I said also earlier, even in the frame of given possibilities and chances which we already have, which exist, we cannot fulfill this. So it actually shows that, yeah, there is very long road to go to implement all these nice ideas which some EU foreign ministers wrote in their letter. There are also some other elements, like let's go and elect the president of Europe. Here again, I'm really skeptical, because as we all know, if there is directly elected president, then the expectations are really high. So this president also, as you know, in America also has to deliver. I cannot imagine Europe with 28 plus X countries, and there is one directly elected president who can, you know, satisfy all these countries, all these different groups in these European countries, so on. And it's completely false or wrong from my point of view to give wrong or create wrong expectations. That you let people to elect directly president, and later on you say that, well, it's just symbolic figure. There will be disappointment, there will be huge problem after it if you do like this. And there are also, well, it's quite fresh proposal. Of course, we're going to analyze and discuss all the elements and proposals there, but my first reaction will be that there are things which are doable in quite foreseeable future or in short time frame, but there are also things which I think that they are at the moment very idealistic, and they will stay very idealistic and theoretical, so that it will be impossible to implement them.
Thank you. Maybe I'll come in and ask a question while others are getting ready. So your analyses, I think, are accurate in the sense that they're pointing to the evolution that took place, the current problems, and in fact the pessimism in terms of further federalization of Europe. Right? Let's juxtapose it to the economic situation. The current crisis and the dynamics of it is indicating that unless Europe is willing to coordinate, to put it mildly, or more precisely, to unite more, certainly along fiscal lines, in addition to the monetary lines, that the situation, the economic situation, will not be tenable. That effectively, we probably would go back to something where there may not be further accession to the united currency, there may be disintegration going to still free trade and hopefully free mobility of labor, but individual states that are freely trading with each other, which clearly will give Europe much less power, much less weight to throw around the world. It is the largest economy in the world if it's single market and everything, single currency and so on, but much weaker if it's individual states. You are essentially saying that the second alternative, namely going the more atomistic way with a free market and so on, is much more likely for political reasons, that you cannot see this federalization going closer together. Is that right? And if so, you see Europe as being weaker in that sense going forward? It would be a reversal, major reversal of all the steps before. And the problem right now is that the last steps that are to be taken on the economic unification are so powerful and require unification on both monetary and fiscal grounds, which I think Europe, as we see, is maybe not ready for.
Actually, of course, there's a certain danger, what you say, but still, in this economic war, I do think the friends of a confederation of Europe will lose, and the Union will win. Similar to another country, we know. And thanks God we don't have these battles with artillery, but only with accountants and banks and checks and so on. And I do think actually, you see, it is a crisis which, as I told you, we needed, and to get closer. And I do think everybody who realized that economically it wouldn't work all along a full market free movement of workforce and so on without a political integration. Yeah. Because then the different states will again make protective laws and so on, and in 10 years the whole thing would be at an end. I think we can't go back, you see, and that's the simple fact of how the development became. I know many people are dreaming about it, but I don't think as a realistic proposition.
Well, I guess that to be the biggest economical and trade actor in the world and the same single market with 500 million customers, it is also in final end so strong argument that even if you look at all these financial, fiscal, economic discussions, that in final end actually most of people agree that we should not go back. And then remains the issue, how much can we do, as I said, at this very moment in this existing legal framework, how much there is political logics in it, so that at this stage to do something more together to create new regulations on fiscal and financial areas, it is completely logical. Because now finally also I guess everybody understands that you cannot have single currency if you don't have the same rules. When euro was introduced, well, in this sense was again the time where everybody was happy, economy was growing, nobody really, thought on this, that we maybe should also have the measures or concrete rules for situation when some countries or general situation is quickly changing and not to the positive side. So that it is one of the areas where I guess we can, yes, also at this very moment move forward. When we speak about all this banking union and all other stuff, there is clear political logics to do something more than so far. Also, if to look at concrete countries, then we hear very much about the problems in Greece and more also in Spain. But we are not anymore listening so much about how is Latvia doing, how is Ireland doing, how is Portugal doing, the countries which had huge problems 2-3 years ago. And the fact is that these countries are now doing well or almost well. Latvia even paid back, I don't know, more than 150 whatever millions to IMF because they are conveniently again on track. So it means that also the problems with concrete countries, when the problems were rising, then everybody knew about it, lots of pessimism, so on. But actually we are not following so much that there have been working solutions. So that in this sense, I'm also not skeptical about, in final end, what concerns also the countries which at the moment are maybe in the middle of problems and crises.
Ministers will have to go and save the world. A quick question. Okay, go ahead, run here to the podium and ask the last quick question.
My question pertains to what lessons does the European experience have for other regional blocs working towards integration, such as ASEAN, UNISOR, African Union, Arab League, and so forth? What elements of the EU's experience could they apply to their own efforts, and what elements should they avoid? Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's always wise to look at others' mistakes and take some lessons. I guess at this very moment in the world, there are no other regional organization which works so practically together and make so practical cooperation than European Union. So that all other regional organizations, they are not yet on the level where we can, well, directly compare what is right or wrong in the European Union. But of course, even at this stage, if some other geographical or some other regional organizations like to be more practical and make more cooperation on every field, of course, they can look at the experience of Europe and European Union. The greatest success so far of the EU, of course, is that after 1945, there have been no wars between member states of the European Union. And if to look what's going on in different parts of the world, so I think that it is actually still very important and even most important goal to achieve. It's fact that democracies, European Union member states, they don't need to solve the issues through wars between each other. And then, of course, well, comes additional benefit, like the same single market issue. As I said, 500 million customers, it is strong asset. Plus, well, the attempts to have more and more joint foreign and security policy, so on. Of course, I guess there have been also mistakes, but it is then benefit of these other regional organizations. They can avoid these mistakes if they will choose the same way to go.
Thank you.
Welcome. There, yeah. Please.
Good morning. My name is Evelina Pagalo. I'm a graduate student at the School of International and Public Affairs and doing my PA now. My question more concerns the eternal strifes of what's happening right now in Europe. And I was wondering about the attitude that your country has, and as a representative of your region, of course, towards the southern states of Europe, and if the constant streaming of money towards them has affected the way the population identify with the idea of Europe, and have you seen these last years during the crisis a big difference in the mentality of people towards Europe and towards the southern states specifically?
Well, thank you for the question. And as I said in my starting monologue again, it is actually one of the risks where this permanent negative flow of news, especially from fiscal and debt sector, especially concrete problems with Greece, with Spain these days. Of course, there is risk that people start more and more to think about Europe as some sort of source of problems as such. So that, to be very honest, short answer will be yes, of course. If you read and listen years and years that, well, there are problems with Greece, again, new packages, they don't work, this and that, or other countries, of course, it makes difference. At the same time, what concerns especially us, Estonia, where we still, our life standard is below the average of the European Union, then I guess people also still understand that this solidarity principle of Europe is important also for us. Also these days, it is fact that if you look at the European Union's budget, then for every euro Estonia pays into EU's budget, we get annually 5.5 euros back. And it is also only because of this solidarity principle. Sometimes people and critics forget this fact, and also some other facts, why that this solidarity is not only to support, Greece people, but there are also, well, slightly other elements which also concern directly us. So that I guess that this kind of, if you try to give also to public audience whole picture, it also helps to balance this, maybe this only very one-sided and negative approach. But, well, of course, it's very hard also to argue with the facts that, well, why should we, for example, support Greece, where the pensions in Estonia are 6 times lower than in Greece, also after cuts? Of course, it's, quite difficult to explain. But then the only way is to put also these issues to a much larger picture and try to, explain all this stuff through Estonia. And it actually goes to the same, that it is our clear interest that Europe remains strong from security perspective, foreign policy point of view perspective, also the same single market, and in final end all the same, that well, yes, we get 5.5 euros back for every euro we spend there.
Thank you.
Welcome.
microphone has not come to me.
Yes, it's a pity, isn't it?
The way takes longer than my question. Dear Mr. Minister, I would like to come back to your initial thoughts and also what you were saying now about Greece, for instance, thinking about Lisboa. How can people take a stand for be Greece or Estonia or any other country, any other religion, if they do not know anything about it? And this is, of course, a difficult question to a Minister of Foreign, but it is, for me, the main question. We have a Comenius. We used to have other thinkers in Europe or all over the world. Where are these thoughts, these integrative thoughts, and also in education? History is being written upon or on wars instead of on integration. So how can we even think of an integration may trickle down to people if we still think in a very exclusive kind of way? This was a question.
Well, was it question or rhetoric question, you know? So. Usually I should answer to this kind of question that, good question, next please. So I guess that, of course, there is no very concrete answer to it. I share all your concerns and this realism, what we see, but as we all know, also in our democratic societies, the strongest communicator, also between the society and big thinkers, is the mass media. And, of course, there is absolutely important that you have to create the interest among journalists. As I mentioned here earlier, this Lisbon Treaty example, in the case of Estonia, where more or less there were no articles about Lisbon Treaty, but we decided, you know, very important things. How Europe, it means our everyday life environment will change. But it was, well, not interesting enough to communicate it through mass media. So it is actually the permanent problem. There is no good recipe to change it. The only thing is that the people who feel, you know, real responsibility, they just have to, you know, push and push and push to get the messages through to mass media, the meetings with the people, whatever, all these social networks, all these Facebooks and Twitters and whatever. I don't think that there is something better. And the problem, of course, is that to be against, to be critical, to be populist, it's always easier, because then you can, you know, have very strong and simple slogans, messages you can get through. I guess it was Prime Minister Churchill many decades ago when he asked the question and answered, what is the strongest argument against democracy? And he answered, strongest argument against democracy is 5-minute conversation with average voter. Of course, we have to try to, you know, try to change it every day.
Mark Engberg, Stanford University Center for Russian Eastern European Studies. I'm wondering, given your unique perspective on Estonia and the Baltic region as a whole, if you could comment briefly just on how each of the countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, have all dealt with the economic crisis in Europe. And also if you could paint a bit of a picture as to Tallinn's relations with Riga and Vilnius, the extent to which the Baltics work in concert within the EU politically and economically.
Yeah, thank you. What concerns the issue how we survived the economic crisis, then it was different, as you know. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, it was different. I guess in Latvia the situation was the most difficult. They also then had IMF program and support from other European countries. But as I said, they actually did all these programs, what was needed, very well, and now they're back on track. In our case, the advantage was that we had and we still have the lowest debt level of Europe. The debt level of Estonia is 6% of GDP. It is certainly the lowest in Europe, and I guess one of the lowest in the world. And it meant that we didn't, well, have to pay all these interests, and we didn't have, and we still don't have the high burden of loans. And second was that during good times we collected reserves. and we had chance then to use our reserves during crisis. So that I'm glad that during all this last 20 years, and it was not important which government exactly we had, but the main principle was that the budgets annually, they have to be balanced. So that we didn't have this history of negative budgets, you know, getting more and more minuses and problems. So that it was actually the clear element how we survived crisis. And second was that I guess we responded very quickly. So that 2009 we made, I guess, two very quick new budgets during the year with minuses. So that we made very quickly different cuts to be in this sense in the boundary of this, not getting more than -2–3% of deficit also during the crisis year. So that I think that it helped us to survive. And then from the 1st of January last year, we are also members of Eurozone. So that we the last newcomer to Eurozone. And I should say that we're very happy with the experience we have so far. Whatever magazines and press writes, we are happy and we practice it. That cooperation between Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, it is actually really strong and in this sense open-minded. My personal feeling is that they are not foreign countries. You know, they more or less as we are. Of course, between, you know, even in the family and good friends and neighbors, there are always issues. You can find problems, but I guess that our everyday's cooperation is like the same blood circle. So that I'm really happy on it. And it's not only Latvia, Lithuania, but it's I should say that all our region more and more functions the same way. It is so-called Nordic Baltic 8. It is also Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland. So that we meet regularly. Well, we also try to do some things faster than it is possible in all EU frame. So that in practical way we so much interlinked, and also if to look at the economy, then also our economies are so much interdependent and interlinked. So. Well, if there are no more questions, then welcome to Estonia. It's not so far. Weather is more or less the same, but a bit colder. So that if you need also to cool down, maybe in January, February, nice time to come, -25, lots of snow. You can drive by car on the ice, on the sea. There is meter of ice on the sea, and there are official car routes open, 20 kilometers. But the speed should be exactly 40 kilometers per hour. Otherwise, there will be some sort of resonance and you go through. So that, thank you very much for your attention. Enjoy the weekend and welcome to Estonia.